To the Point with Michael Williams.
Good morning and welcome to a special edition of To the Point. Today we have the only televised debate between the candidates for Congress in the 18th Congressional District. They are Patrick Murphy, the Democrat, finishing his first term in Congress after upsetting Allen West in 2012, and Carl Domino, the Republican and former Florida State House Representative. The district covers Martin and St. Lucie counties and the northern section of Palm Beach County. By a flip of a coin, the first question goes to Congressman Murphy. Congressman, I would ask you, outside of your political experience, what professional and life experience best qualifies you and most qualifies you to be in Congress and to address the concerns of the voters of the 18th?
Well, thank you, Michael, first of all, for having us today. We appreciate this opportunity. I would say my background as a CPA, one of 10 CPAs in all of Congress, is pretty important when you look at some of our challenges as a country, whether it's our debt, whether it's our unemployment. These are some of the top concerns. Being one of those few CPAs, I think, is particularly important. Also, being a small business owner, someone that can relate to those concerns of small business owners, I think is particularly important. But, I was elected to Congress on a message of bipartisanship and getting things done for our district, and I stand by that pledge. Whether it's, working to get our fiscal house in order, fighting for our local communities, or being that independent voice in Washington, I believe I've been a strong advocate for our communities. And one of the first bills I put forward was called the SAVE Act, a bill that identified $330 billion of wasteful, duplicative spending. Ended up getting 7 amendments passed, cutting tens of billions of dollars of wasteful spending.
We will jump more deeply into the issues, including the budget and the runaway national debt. I would put the same question to you, Mr. Domino. By dint of experience outside of politics, what in your life experience and your professional experience do you think most qualifies you to understand and address the concerns of the district?
Well, thank you, and that's a great opening question. First, let me start with the obvious. I've lived in the district more years than Congressman Murphy has months. He moved just 2 years ago from south of here to run for Congress. I spent 20 years in the military with the issues of in Afghanistan, with the issues with our veterans, with the issues in Iraq and Syria. I don't pretend to be a military expert. I was actually just a supply officer. But I did go to Vietnam and have a fairly good understanding of some of those issues. I, like Patrick, was also a small businessman. I started a small business in West Palm Beach in Florida. I went all over the world to raise the capital. We had 4 employees. We had about $10 million under management. 13 years later, 50 employees and $3.5 billion. I've been on national TV many times talking about capital markets. He's a CPA. I'm not a CPA, but I was an honors accounting major at Florida State and have an MBA from Harvard. And just a few weeks ago, got a law degree from Nova. So I think I know numbers as well as anyone that's in that Congress.
We'll talk about numbers, as I said at the outset to the Congressman, because a lot say Congress in general has not done nearly enough to rein in the runaway spending that afflicts, many argue, the long-term future for our children. A brief counter response to you. Long time, rooted in the district, new to it.
Oh, I'm the only one between the two of us that's from Florida. See, I was born and raised in the Florida Keys. I grew up enjoying our outdoors. I understand the Everglades. I understand our economy here. Not to mention the fact that in my 22 months being elected to office, I've done over 600 official public events in this community, many of which are, bridge openings, Chamber of Commerce events. I've done autism walks. I've done, hundreds and hundreds of events in this community.
Let's move on to some of the issues. Let's talk about All Aboard Florida, the high-speed rail planned to run from Miami to Orlando with stops in Fort Lauderdale and West Palm, but not on the Treasure Coast. No stop there, but it would go through the Treasure Coast, a big uproar on the Treasure Coast among residents there. Congress has no formal vote on the project, and that begs the question that political reporter Isadora Rangel from our partners at TC Palm asked simply, do you really think you can stop it, Mr. Domino?
Well, I do.
And how?
And I think I have a much better chance than the congressman, and let me tell you why. A year ago this time, the congressman wrote a letter to the Federal Department of Transportation telling about all the good things about All Aboard Florida and telling them to expedite the project. Now he's come out in opposition way after we came out. The Achilles heel of All Aboard Florida is the financing they want. Now, we've gotten some good news the last few days. Instead of going for the federal grants, they say they're going to go for public financing. If they go for public financing, they're going to have to prove the viability to what is a skeptical market. When they raised money earlier, they had to pay 12.5%.
But with no formal vote, in plain English, what real leverage at the end of the day do you have to stop All Aboard Florida, which you now both formally oppose? We'll get to your criticism in a moment. But candidly, is it two people taking an issue that has populist appeal and jumping on it without any real ability to do anything about it?
Well, no, I think you do have real ability because DOT's got to approve it. Apparently, you've got to approve the bonds to be issued. I'm an expert in the capital markets. I'll be able to go to road shows and explain why our district does not want that. I'll be a loud voice as the congressman-elect.
At what source do you block it fundamentally?
If they go for funding and they cannot raise the money in the markets, you have blocked the train.
Congressman, he points out, rightly, in 2013 you were one of many people who signed a letter suggesting All Aboard had the potential to modernize the letter said, a transportation corridor, and boost Florida's economy. By the way, that's a view widely shared by backers of the project, including many in counties to the south, Broward, Miami, and on up to Orlando. What changed your mind?
Let me just be clear here. I'm 100% against All Aboard Florida, and I have some very serious concerns about what this is going to mean for the safety of our communities, you know, the quality of life, the maritime industry, real estate values, and the fiscal aspects of this and what this means for taxpayer money. So I've got some real concerns, and I've outlined those to the Secretary of Transportation. I've had numerous meetings with him to make it very clear why I'm against this. We've called for the Coast Guard to come up to our community and have hearings, and they've agreed to do just that. And
I worry about stoppages at bridge crossings, I presume.
Some of the estimates are terrible that the bridge will be closed twice as long as currently.
I want to be clear, though. You did, at one point, as did many others, say you thought this could be a real benefit. What changed your mind, fundamentally?
Like anything, as you learn more, as more information comes out, you see, we learned that a safety report came out post that letter saying that this was going to pose some serious problems. Number two, we learned how many trains were actually going to be there. And number three, that there was going to be no stop in the Treasure Coast.
Yes or no? If there was a stop that could be built in on the Treasure Coast, yes or no, would you support All Aboard Florida?
With the safety problems that we have right now in the fiscal aspect of this, I still would not support it.
No.
Even if there was a stop, they would build in under pressure.
I would only support if it were west of the tracks and they used their own private money.
We'll see where that goes. Let's talk Treasure Coast water crisis. Decades-old plumbing of Lake Okeechobee, the Caloosahatchee to the west, the St. Lucie River to the east, the estuary, the Indian River Lagoon last summer hammered so badly because they can't send the water south because they haven't done central Everglades planning that would allow water to be filtered and safely sent south into the Glades. So where did it go last summer? East and west. Our viewers in the Treasure Coast and beyond well know the crisis. Mr. Domino, in plain English, how do you, if you go to Congress, fix or continue to fix the problem? And I know it's very involved and complicated, but what are the most fundamental things you would do?
Well, first let me congratulate the congressman because he, not having lived around here, quickly did realize this is a monumental issue. When I spent time in the legislature, according to some environmentalists, I brought over $120 million to help with Florida Forever, the Lake Worth Lagoon, the Loxahatchee South Fork. What we really need to do is have a loud voice, a continuing loud voice, to raise the federal matching funds. You know, SERP was a $7 billion project. Over the years, the state put in there $3.5 to acquire land and holding facilities. The feds have really not matched it very well.
How do you put their feet to the fire?
Well, unfortunately, even when we had a president and a governor with the same last name, we weren't able to get that money. So what you've got to do is you've got to work it very hard. You've got to try to build consensus. And I would say this, the one advantage I would have clearly is I think the Republicans will control the House of Representatives. It's going to be easier for Republicans to get into leadership about that issue than a Democrat. But this should be a bipartisan, nonpartisan issue, just as it was in the state when I got that $100+ million.
Congressman Murphy, clarify as you wish, and what is the most consequential thing you've done that's in the pipeline right now to address the water crisis?
Starting off with the $38 million that's in the administration's budget, that's 100% of the money requested for by the Army Corps of Engineers for a project called C-44.
Which essentially, in plain English, would...
Sorry, that is a plan to help clean and filter that dirty water as it comes out of the lake and heads towards the estuary. The $1.4 billion that's in the water bill this year. It's the first time the water bill passed in 7 years. We got 4 key projects, and their totaling was $1 billion to help clean and filter that water and send it south. But let me just clarify my opponent's record on the environment. He touts himself to be good on it, but there's a very clear difference here. When he was in the State House, he voted to delay Everglades forever. That would actually have delayed pollution limits to allow more toxic water in our backyard. He also voted to zero out funding for Florida Forever. That's the land conservation program.
Direct response to those criticisms?
Well, when you're in the legislature and income has dropped, you've got to go against some projects you'd like to do. Unlike the federal government, who just prints money, Congress has voted for over $1 trillion more budget. We voted for a balanced budget every year, and we had to make some very tough and difficult decisions.
And you made yours on those environmental issues at that time.
Exactly.
One quick follow-up to you. $38 million, as one of my colleagues noted, Senator Joe Negron, the Republican state senator from Stewart's, rallied and gotten about $200 million in state money for Everglades cleanup. The argument would be, if we can do that at the state level, what do you need to do to put more feet to the fire, since you're in Congress right now, to get a lot more from the feds?
Look, there is no question the federal government needs to do a lot more, no question about it. But we need to get the state, federal, and local governments working together on the Everglades, on our environment. And let me just point out again that the water bill passed for the first time in 7 years. That was $1.4 billion. That was a huge amount of money to be authorized to come to our area to protect our environment.
I want to move to another issue. Both of you, there's a group called Project Vote Smart, and either by omission or commission, you or your staffs did not take their political courage test. It's a group recognized nationally for trying to get to the bottom of issues. They say you both flunked the test, didn't take it. Correct me if you've taken it since that report a few days ago, but I have a copy of the test here right now. Let's jump off before our break on one of the topics, and we're going to go back to some more. Healthcare. Bottom line, do you support repealing the 2010 Affordable Care Act? Mr. Domino?
I support the repeal.
And we'll get to your answers why and get into depth. Do you support repealing it?
I support getting it right.
Do you support repealing it?
No.
Talk about what you would do if you repeal it. And you've been on record as saying you think no part of the Affordable Care Act is viable, but people say, I can have my kids on it till they're 26 years old.
No, actually, I've been on record saying there's certain elements of the act that we should do in certain different ways. For example, we should eliminate the lifetime caps.
Okay.
We should have a special pool for people who have pre-existing conditions.
Is it unfair? I did see one quote, and I want you to clarify it, that suggested that you thought all of it was bad.
I think you need to repeal the act and then have other acts that would do the things you want to accomplish.
You'd keep pre-existing conditions, you'd keep coverage for children perhaps to age 26, things like that.
Well, the pre-existing conditions, the children's, and the big one, though, is the lifetime limits. $1 million policy doesn't do what it used to do 20 years ago. Those are things that need to be done.
How fundamentally, if you would repeal it, do you replace it?
Fundamentally, instead of a bill, and let me start this way. If you have a nice house, the best in the neighborhood, and it springs a leak, you don't tear the whole house down to fix the leak. This is a redistribution of income approach that the administration and Mr. Murphy support. I would say let's look at the fundamentals of health care and attack those. And there's two fundamental places you've got to look. In most European countries, 8 to 10% is spent on health care. In our country, 18%. There's a lot of ways to get that 18%, maybe down to 15 or 14.
What do you fundamentally do as your top three things when you repeal it to fix it?
Tort reform, less defensive medication, and standard of practices which let other people do rather. And you know, things like capitation and stuff like that have been successful.
Plain English again, what?
So much a day to cover someone,
right.
Not fee for service.
And what about this argument Republicans always make that interstate competition will somehow, they argue, with competition, reduce the cost of health care? Do you believe it's that easy?
Well, it would reduce the cost of health care insurance.
And I certainly know that health care, you both grind your teeth, as do I. It's so complicated, we're not going to cover it in a half hour or days. But your response to, if you so choose, Mr. Domino's arguments, you say you would not repeal it, but you've talked about delaying implementation of it, so you're not happy with all of it. Clarify where you stand.
I actually love that analogy that he just used of fixing the leak in the house.
How do you
Under
fix
his
it?
plan, he would go tear down the house and get rid of the Affordable Care Act. I believe you should fix the leak, so I've actually supported 18 different pieces of legislation to improve the Affordable Care Act. One of those was a delay of that mandate, because as we saw—
Which mandate?
The individual and the business mandate. We saw that this plan was not ready for prime time, so I supported that delay.
So why did we have a plan if it wasn't ready for prime time?
The actual rollout was not ready.
So beyond mandates and rolling those back by, I believe, till 2015,
yes.
What else would you do to fundamentally fix the Affordable Care Act, which so many people, including doctors who I talk to all the time, say they're running away from, they don't feel it's going to do enough. I talk to doctors all the time concerned about it. There's been issues about sign-up. There was the famous pledge, if you like your insurance, you can keep it, made by President Obama, which he had to retract.
perfect segue. I actually supported legislation that said just that. If you like your plan, you can keep it. You know, I was in the minority of my party voting for that.
Is the Affordable Care Act such damaged goods in many political circles that it should be repealed and start over as something far simpler?
You see, this is the problem, Michael. It was so many different issues, and the Affordable Care Act is perfect. And my opponent's going to go to D.C., theoretically, you know, under what he's saying here, and be part of the problem, because you have two groups of people. You have one group saying it's completely broken, just get rid of the whole thing. Another group saying it's perfect, don't touch it. It's somewhere in the middle.
My producer's taking us to break. Your biggest fundamental fix, and then you'll have the closing word.
You know, I would say, you know, delaying the mandate to make sure this thing was right.
Your biggest fundamental fix. You've talked about repealing it, but of all the things you mentioned.
We need to keep the promises. For example, we need to get rid of the 21 taxes. If the Supreme Court were to rule that the subsidy for insurance policies bought other than the state were illegal, it would fall, it would collapse.
We'll be back in a moment, a short break. When we return, the candidates, among other things, will answer some questions you sent in. More from our political courage test, too. Welcome back to our debate between Democratic Congressman Patrick Murphy of the 18th and Carl Domino, the Republican in the race for Congress in that district, covering Martin, St. Lucie, parts of northern Palm Beach County. We have a few questions from viewers for both of you to answer. We'll begin with you, Mr. Domino. Explain your ideas for the best strategy to protect our country from harmful acts by extremists.
By terrorists, I guess they mean. Well, let's step back. My opponent went to Afghanistan early this year, said the Taliban was being held at bay. They're capturing cities. My opponent, Barack Obama, supported the immediate and complete withdrawal from Iraq. That's turned into a disaster. Syria and Iraq are falling to the Taliban.
Should we still have ground troops in that region?
We should have troops on the ground to at least do intelligence and training and forward observation. Yes,
should we have ground troops to deal with the ISIS threat?
Well, yeah, that's what you're doing.
The president has said no ground troops.
Well, I think that's a bad judgment. The president said he was going to take everyone out of Iraq. Mr. Murphy on his campaign site agree with that. Even now, Leon Panetta and the general said that was a major mistake.
His former CIA chief and the former Defense Secretary, Leon Panetta, one of the gentlemen you're referring to, do you support the president on his pledge, no ground troops to fight ISIS, when there is a big argument about whether, for all the air power being thrown at ISIS, we need ground troops eventually? Do you support, first of all, yes or no, the pledge of no ground troops to fight ISIS? No U.S. ground troops.
As of today, no ground troops. Doesn't mean conditions don't change on the ground
what
as we progress.
What conditions would change it?
Well, everything seems to change. I mean, there's a very liquid situation.
What would be the red line for you?
I can't say there's a red line. I would say that I think the president was slow to act and going after ISIS. I do support getting a coalition of countries. Ultimately, I think that's how you're going to solve this, as long as that coalition is being led by the Arab League. And I do support airstrikes, no ground troops at this time.
Brief follow-up question from George Bennett, the veteran political reporter with the Palm Beach Post, and it follows on to this. Briefly from you, what letter grade would you give President Obama for his recognition of and response to ISIS to date? What letter grade?
Incomplete. I mean, we have years potentially fighting them. We've got to stay on the offensive against them. But if this is going to be a lasting attack on them, we're going to need this to be led by an international coalition.
Same question to you, sir. What letter grade?
Michael, there are people out there killing people, but there are people out there killing people because they're Christians and they're Jews. They are going to have tremendous instability. They would attack our best ally, Israel, as soon. This is an F, and waiting to see what happens, that's not a strategy, that's of a hope.
Another question. How do you feel about implementation of a guest worker program versus training and providing incentives for employers to hire only U.S. citizens? Again, this coming from one of our viewers. You see it on the screen. Again, how do you feel about implementation of a guest worker program versus training and incentives for employers to hire only U.S. citizens? Congressman Murphy?
I believe we need a complete rewrite. We need major comprehensive immigration reform in our country. And in the immigration reform that I support, it was very similar to what Governor Jeb Bush supported, what Senator Marco Rubio, 67 senators supported. In that, first and foremost, you have border security. You definitely, that is first and foremost. Number two, you have a pathway to citizenship for these 11 to 12 million undocumented that are there.
Where's the pathway take them?
So in the Senate plan that passed, number one, they go to the back of the line. They pass a test showing they speak English. They pay their back taxes. If they're criminals, they get kicked out. And over a 12-year period, they are on their way. I do not support amnesty, however.
You support the rest of the infrastructure of that plan, which is stalled in Congress. It's going nowhere right now. What fundamentally do you do as one of 535 people in the House and Senate to spur it onward?
continue to get a coalition of businesses. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce endorsed that plan as well.
To the viewer question first about guest worker program versus incentives for hiring only U.S. citizens, your answer to that, then the follow-on.
Well, a guest worker program appropriately would give a preference to an American. In other words, to get a guest worker, you have to show that you don't have an American citizen. But I'm all for guest worker programs. They come in for whatever period of time is appropriate to do whatever they do, and then they leave. We tried in the legislature to get E-Verify. But let me go back to one thing that the congressman said. He says he's against amnesty, but that bill is amnesty. And he says he's for border security, but he just voted against a $600 million border security bill in August.
Your conversation, go ahead.
First of all, that's not true. I voted, and any immigration bill must have border security. Number two, under this premise, half of the U.S. Senate Republicans support amnesty, I guess, and you're saying Marco Rubio and Jeb Bush support amnesty?
The point is, you support amnesty.
The argument. No, I
and
do
the
not
point
support
is,
amnesty.
are you
I've said
saying in
that
August you
continually.
did not vote against that bill?
I
That's the
supported-
Republican. Did you vote for the bill or against the bill?
That bill had nothing to do with this.
Oh, it didn't have anything with border security?
Bill had to do.
We can
You should
look up
reread
the bill.
Please
I
do.
did read the bill.
Please do.
We will table that ongoing point. We're going to go back to the political courage test, and I want to ask you a question. Again, it's from Project Vote Smart. They said you both failed and didn't take it. Do you agree that you or your staffs didn't bother to take this test from this nonpartisan group? And I know you get a lot of tests.
I would say we
so
get
fairness.
hundreds of those, so
All right.
I'm not sure.
But this is a group that has wide appeal and has gotten wide positive critiques from media, left, right, and center. So let's go back to that. Social Security, going bust long-term, many argue if we don't do anything about it. How do you make up the long-term shortfall? Briefly, first you, Congressman.
Social Security and Medicare, I believe, are two of the most important programs in our country's history. Have lifted and kept more people out of poverty than any other program. The truth is, with Social Security, it is 100% sustainable until the year 2033. The simplest, easiest fix in doing that is raising the amount in which people invest. Right now, that cap is $117,000.
You would take off the cap.
I would speed up at the pace at which that cap raises. Right now, it raises every single year anyway. I would speed that up. My opponent, however, supports putting that into Wall Street, investing that. I do not support privatization of Social Security.
So you're essentially saying, and others have said, Ted Deutsch has said the same thing, that if we raised the payroll amount and basically took off any cap that you paid on Social Security taxes all year, no matter your salary, it would close the deficit on Social Security.
And I would entirely raise it. I would speed the pace.
And his criticism.
And that's only true if you do not raise the benefit on what you get. Mr. Murphy doesn't understand how Social Security works. You put in so much, you get an amount of money based on what you've put in. Now, I'm not doing this to protect Social Security for me. I already get Social Security.
How do you fix it?
I'm doing it to protect it for him.
How do you fix it?
I've told you this before, and I would tell you anywhere. We should really have the money put in a trust fund, and it should be invested by professionals. Every state does that, every major corporate. If they were in the stock market for a long period of time, they get 8 to 12% rather than the 1 or 2% they get on government bonds.
You're not scared that putting it in the market with what we see sometimes would be the death knell for it over the long term, given what we've seen the last dozen years?
It never has been in the past.
Let's go to the rest of our political courage test, because I want to give each of you a closing comment. And I want yes or no answers here. Again, this is from Project Vote Smart. They send it to all congressional candidates.
I don't like yes or no answers. That's probably why I didn't fill it out.
That may be, but nonetheless, for people who may not know your positions, abortion, do you generally support pro-choice or pro-life legislation?
Pro-choice.
Sir?
I'm clearly closer to pro-life.
Pro-life. The budget. In order to balance the budget, do you support reducing defense spending, yes or no?
Not right now.
Not right now, but you don't rule it out at some point.
I support an audit of DOD.
Same question.
We should not reduce defense spending.
In order to balance the budget, do you support an income tax increase on any tax bracket, sir?
No.
Why
No.
not? Briefly.
Because the way to reduce the budget is by pro-growth tax ways. We do not need to increase taxes further, which this administration did on small businessmen, and one of the reasons why we're not creating jobs right now.
No, I do not. I support simplifying the tax code, actually bringing down the rates, getting rid of the loopholes and deductions.
You realize that both people say when it comes to political courage, Republicans and Democrats refuse to talk about taxes and cutting entitlements, and that's the very essence of lack of political courage. At the end of the day, someday, do you agree that we're going to have to cut entitlements and raise taxes, a mix, in order to get the long-term national debt, $16 trillion and climbing, I think $17 trillion now, actually,
17.5.
down?
Yeah.
Yes or no?
Michael, the very
Briefly.
first thing I did when I was elected to Congress was put a group of freshmen, Republicans and Democrats together to address just this.
Sir?
Absolutely not. What you need to do is have growth in the economy, the economy will grow fast enough to pay down the debt. It has happened every other time we've done it that way.
15 seconds, a final comment from you, then Mr. Domino. Congressman Patrick Murphy.
Yeah, thank you for having us today. I'm proud of the positive campaign I've run. I'm proud of my independent voting record. And the truth is, you don't have to take my word for it. You can listen to the TC Palm or the Palm Beach Post, who both said I'm a moderate ideal for this district.
Mr. Domino, you have the final word.
Well, both papers said I was a moderate. The only difference was with Mr. Murphy, and they did endorse him. They said his positions are part of a political calculus. And I, unlike Mr. Murphy, wasn't born in Florida. My dad was a Marine. He was stationed all over the world. The difference is this. Barack Obama said it best. You're not voting for my name on the ballot. You're voting for my policies. Patrick Murphy has been a strict adherence to those policies, having changed from the Republican 2 years
I
ago.
think it's our names on that.
15 seconds, you've gone over. I thank you both. I know it was a whirlwind debate and a half hour, but we hope people have a little better sense, especially with you both out on the trail. We thank you for spending time with us on today's To The Point as they've come and met with many of you door to door. If you'd like to send a comment about the broadcast, go to ptv.com, click on the To The Point page. As always, wishing you and yours a great day and a great week.